Hi everyone, I'm Theo and this is the Death Saw from JPTR effects. It's got no external controls other than an on-off switch, so you might be wondering what it even is. It is effectively a Boss HM-2 heavy metal, which is a favourite of Swedish guitarists of a death metal persuasion. It's otherwise known as the Swedish chainsaw. General rule of thumb with the HM-2 is that you should dime all the knobs and it gives a tone that I like to call skronky. I've actually got a couple of videos on the HM-2 on my channel. Feel free to search for them after this. But it's not something you would generally consider to be a bass pedal, although some bass players do use it. The Death Saw is not a straight up clone of the HM-2, however. It's got some really interesting features that I think a lot of bass players will really dig. The biggest departure from the stock HM-2 circuit is that the Death Saw introduces a clean blend. This clean blend is totally separate to the fuzz signal and has got its own volume control, amongst other things. If you wanted, you could even just use the Death Saw as a clean boost, but I don't know why you'd do that with something called a Death Saw. Along with the clean signal, there's actually an active bass boost, so you can boost the low end of the dry signal that's passing through the pedal. Let's give that a listen. So we've already seen that we can not only blend in our clean signal, but we can also boost the low end of that clean signal. But that's not all. As well as the low boost circuit, there's also 2 high cut switches, meaning that you can actually cut the high end on the dry signal as well. So say for instance, you kind of want to just keep your lows and your mids consistent with your bypass tone. You can actually use the flick switches to cut off the top and into the very high mids. So it's not stepping on the toes of the fuzz signal when you blend that in. Regarding the fuzz signal itself, the only controls we're given are a volume control and the tight switches. I think these tight switches are actually pre-gain low cut, because when you turn them on, you get less drive, less volume, and less low end. And like the high cut circuit, the tight switches also give you another way of kind of separating out the clean and dirty sounds so they're not intermingling too much. Now, I want to be honest with you and tell you about my experience with this death saw that I bought. There's a few things that you may not have the same experience, but I think I should just let you know anyway. First thing, when the pedal arrived, I could not get the two top screws out of the pedal. They were wedged in tight, almost like they'd been super glued or something. Obviously I used a screwdriver to try and get them out. That didn't work. I heated the screws up with a soldering iron to hope that would cause them to budge a bit. That didn't work either. I probably should have reached out to JPTR Effects, but I didn't. So that's on me. And I ended up getting a drill and just drilling the screws out to get the back off the pedal. Obviously, with a pedal where all the controls are inside, it's quite important that you get into the pedal to be able to adjust stuff. So there we go. The screw shafts are actually still stuck inside the pedal. Even with a pair of pliers, once I'd got the base plate off, I still can't get them out. So they're just kind of there now. My second issue is that the internal trim pots are seemingly made out of a very soft plastic. And the implication is that you would adjust these with a small flat-headed screwdriver, which is what I've got, but I found I've totally gouged out the volume part of the fuzz signal, which is not great, because now I have to be super careful on how I adjust things, because I don't want to, you know, gouge out the rest of the trim pot, but also there isn't much for the screwdriver to attach onto now, to like grip onto to actually make the adjustments. So that's really frustrating. That happened within 24 hours of me getting the pedal. My third issue kind of relates to the second. Seemingly the fuzz volume pot goes from no volume to way over your bypass signal instantly. It's very, very difficult for me to adjust the volume to the point that it sits just right. So that can be pretty tough for me. It makes it hard for me to integrate the Death Saw into my setup. Related to that as well is that the fact that each different bass and guitar I used seems to have a different perceived volume boost, which means that if I'm going to use this with different guitars, different setups, I'm going to need to adjust that volume control, and I'm going to need somewhat precise adjustment of that volume control of the fuzz each time. And again, that's not easy to do. I think that if I was just had the Death Saw always on, it wouldn't be so much of an issue. But I'm someone who does like to go from different layers of gain, step one thing off, one thing on. So I think for that you need to be kind of careful with your gain staging on this. I actually think the Death Saw is great. It might be the best HM-2 for bass. It implements a clean blend in a really interesting and useful way and doesn't take away from any of that kind of skronky HM-2 tone. I love the fact that not only can you blend in your clean signal, you can boost the bass frequencies and cut the high frequencies if you want. This really gives you a lot of control over your clean low end, whilst also keeping the controls for the fuzz signal pretty simple and kind of easy to use. You're not getting bogged down with too many controls, and the main EQ is really just on the clean signal, which as a bass player, retaining that low end is paramount for me. I love the clean, clutter-free look of the Death Saw, but for me, personally, I think it's more of a curse than a blessing. It looks cool, but I can't actually see any real benefit to it being done, and on the negative points, it means that if I want to adjust anything, I have to open up the pedal, get inside, tweak things around, try again. It's not a quick process to adjust this stuff, which, as we've discussed previously, I might need to do if I'm using different basses or different instruments or different pedalboard setups. Having said all that, I can see that if you are a guitarist and you're just looking for a replacement or an alternative to the Boss HM-2 heavy metal, the Death Saw might be great for you. With the HM-2, generally the favorite setting is just turn all the knobs, including the volume, up to maximum. So If you're doing that, you're not really considering what your bypass sound is, because the HM-2 is just going to be on all the time. And I can totally see that this is why this pedal was designed in that way. It's not designed specifically for bass players, and I think that they have stumbled across a really great sort of dirty, grindy overdrive for bass players accidentally. You see, if you look at it on face value, you say, oh, it's an HM-2 clone, or it's called the Death Saw. I guess the first thing you think is some super high gain distortion that's going to be fuzzing out of control. Well, it's actually not that. It's a pretty refined, grindy sort of sound that blends really well with the dry low end on there. It's like an overdrive with an aggressive high mids that's perfect for cutting through the mix. And the fact that you can blend it with the clean low end just makes it all the more usable. I'm really glad I bought the Death Saw. I've got a gig coming up and I'm going to use it for the gig. I just wish that the controls were external so I could tweak things a bit more precisely and have quicker access to them. What do you think of the Death Saw though? Let me know in the comments. If you are not already subscribed and you like this video, then please do consider subscribing. Drop me a like and I'll catch you next week for another pedal.